Hi everyone. We're going to go ahead and continue where we left off on Tuesday, the day before the shutdown, with what we would have talked about on Thursday in class, which is continuing ancient India, the Ganges River civilization, and moving to ancient China and the Shang dynasty and Xia dynasty before it. Um, I have a few things to cover first, and I'll have my webcam on at the start of some of these lectures, and then I'm going to turn my webcam off so that you can see all the content so that my face isn't right here in the middle of everything as we continue. But to start off with, discussion signups. If you were not there on Tuesday and you did not get to sign up to lead discussions, you still need to do that. And you can see the schedule of discussions here in our shared folder, document 2, student-led discussions. You won't be able to write your name on that, but if you haven't signed up for 2 discussions, send me an email with the discussions you want to lead, and go ahead and do that right away. Like pause the video and do that now, so you don't forget. The second thing is mini quiz number 1. I'm going to have you turn it in by the 22nd at the latest, but I'll have a link for you to turn it in, or you can email it to me before then if you want. But according to our syllabus, the 22nd is the date that it is due as an absolute last day. But you should be done with it by now, roughly when I'm putting this video out. It's roughly the due date anyway. Digital classroom survey. So unfortunately, I had actually printed these out. I was going to give you this survey before the shutdown because it seemed like a shutdown was possible. Unfortunately, it happened a day too soon for me to get this survey out to you. But I would like you to go ahead and respond to this survey, especially if you think that you have any concerns or questions about online coursework. This is document number 4, digital classroom survey in our shared folder. And if you can go ahead and send me the answers to these questions via email would be great, or sharing a doc with me would be fine too. The questions are basically, have you taken online classes before? Do you have any concerns with that? And what kind of technology do you have access to? Obviously, in this kind of digital classroom environment, having access to a laptop, desktop, or tablet, and rather than just a phone, is kind of an advantage. And I hope you all have access to one of those things or can get access to one for this course. But if you don't have access to that, please do let me know. And I want to know if there are any other challenges you might face if our class has to become an online remote class, which it has. This has now happened. And these are the questions that I was going to ask you. They're still quite important for me to know. So please do answer these questions. You could also pause the video now and do this. Finally, attendance records. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, and the deadline for this has been extended, all of your teachers, all of your instructors and professors will have to submit what's called a VOE record, a verification of enrollment. And some of you, only a couple of students I think in each class, I haven't seen yet in the in-class meetings we had, in the 3 meetings. If you didn't show up to those meetings and I don't hear from you that you're planning on taking the course, you're going to be automatically dropped from the course. So if you did not come to class for the first 3 days for whatever reason, if you had some reason that you couldn't make it in, please contact me via email, kgooge@lagcc. It's on the syllabus, and please get a hold of me and let me know that you're planning on taking the class. Otherwise, you will be automatically dropped. I'm not sure quite when this will happen. It would have happened midweek next week, but now I think they're going to push it back a little bit by at least a week or 2. But you should get in contact with me. All right, so that's all the basic kind of housekeeping stuff. And now we're going to kind of continue from last time. So I'm going to go ahead and get my face out of the way here. All right, you can still hear my voice. And we'll continue with the Ganges as a major civilization, a major site of civilization. Now, the Ganges is different from the Indus River Valley civilization in that it's continuing. The Indus River Valley civilization continues somewhat in that it continues into the Ganges River civilization, but the Ganges River civilization is really still ongoing today. as many ancient civilizations are, and so we can see a lot more links to it. This is one of the other reasons why the Ganges River civilization is somewhat easier to study and understand than the Indus River civilization. I'm not going to show you entire videos probably, but I'll have this playing in the background. This is Varanasi in the middle of India, in central India. It's located roughly here on the Ganges River. And this is a holy city that has existed for quite some time, probably back to around 1000 to 1100 BCE. So this is right in the middle of the period that we're talking about today, this roughly 1700 BCE to around 500 BCE. This is the focus of this Ganges River lecture, or the section of the lecture today on the Ganges River. It's still a very holy place today. It's a place of ritual. It's a place of life and death. Famously, it is one of the places you go. It is perhaps the place you go in Hindu belief to have your remains cremated and put into the river. You wash yourself in the Ganges, obviously upstream of this cremation site, and you purify yourself in this river, both in life and in death. And so this is a very important holy place. And I have a couple of video links here. I'm not going to watch the videos. I'm not going to lengthen the lecture by watching the videos, but if you're interested in this stuff, and I think in order to get a bit more of a grasp on the Ganges River civilization today, it's a good idea to watch some of these videos at least. Another interesting point on Varanasi is that it is a probable or likely site of the origins of Buddhism. It's not really known exactly where Buddhism started. The Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, is a historical figure, but as with many of these very old historical figures, especially religious figures, there is some debate over, exact origin points and exact elements of the history of Buddhism. And Buddhism is kind of a heterodox, non-orthodox offshoot of Hinduism that may have started in Varanasi. So let's get into a little bit of the belief systems that we're talking about here that are present in Hinduism and also in Buddhism. The concept of samsara develops in later Vedic culture. So in the earliest Vedic texts, we have karma, as I said last time, but not yet samsara. Samsara is the cycle of birth and death that you're trying to escape, especially in Buddhism, in order to reach nirvana. And this is a Buddhist belief. But both Hinduism and Buddhism have this kind of belief in a wheel of life and death. And as it says here, you can be trapped in this cycle of death. So within this wheel of life, there are 6 realms, 3 godly realms and 3 evil or unholy realms. And I just wanted to talk about them for a minute. This graphic here is quite useful in looking at them, but there are also, it's a very popular motif in Hindi and Buddhist art to see these realms depicted very artistically in wall hangings and other things like that. Very common to see wall hangings. And so you can see this design, this diagram is the same thing we see here and here in these. I believe these are both wall hangings or tapestries. This one's more like a poster. We have the 6 realms, the Deva or God realm. This is a realm of bliss and happiness. So if you have good karma, you maybe end up there, but you're not going to be there forever. This heaven, it's called a heaven here at the top of this graphic, is not a place you're trying to go to stay forever, especially in Buddhism. And you're probably not going to get to stay there forever. There's the Manusa, the human realm. This is where we exist, you and I exist, with lives that are kind of variable. Some of them are really great, some of them aren't so great, and this is based on our karmic past largely. So you can see the human realm here in this. It's a pretty good realm to be in. Being in the human realm, it's a mediocre realm, I guess. It's not as good as the Deva realm, and it has some disadvantages. but it is a fairly good place to be. The Ashura or demigod realm, it can also be called the demon realm or demigod realm, is a place of kind of opponents of the devas. These are angry magical beings, as it says there. They are the counterpoint to the devas. So they tend to be devious. They use magic for bad purposes, oftentimes. And so that's one reason why this is often called a demon realm. The three evil realms, we have the animal realm, which kind of like the human realm, it's not actually that bad. It's just that animals are kind of unthinking, amoral beings. They're subject to animalistic fears and desires, so they're uncivilized. This is essentially the major problem with being reborn as an animal, is that you are uncivilized and you are lacking in human emotion and thought. So you're going to live through this lifetime as an animal in this kind of stupor of animalistic instinct. So not so bad, but it is still one of the evil or hell-like realms. There's the realm of the Preta, the hungry ghosts. This one is very interesting, and maybe we'll see a little bit more hungry ghosts in this course, especially when we get to my home area of Japan of research. Hungry ghosts are a very interesting phenomenon. There's an invisible realm, so the hungry ghosts are all around us all the time. They could be sitting right next to you right now, is the theory. And they are the eaters of rot. This is my word for them here. They're one of the things that is used to explain a lot of what is happening around us in the world, a lot of these kind of phenomena that we are not familiar with. For example, imagine you're living 3,000 years ago and you leave an apple out for 3 days sitting on the ground somewhere. And you don't see any bugs go to it, you don't see anything eating it, but it's still rotting away. We know now that this is, in terms of scientific speak, the function of decomposition, microbes, and other invisible to us, to the naked eye, things eating away and causing this rot in this apple. But to ancient Indian, Hindi people and Buddhists as well, this was the evidence of a hungry ghost eating this thing away. So the hungry ghosts eat things like dead bodies. They eat things like rotting meat, rotting fruit and vegetables, rotting food in general. They are one of the causes of disease that we see, is that you're being inhabited or you have a hungry ghost kind of hanging out too close to you. You get a disease, especially something that causes you to waste away. This is the hungry ghost realm. So it's pretty bad. It's much worse than the animal realm to be reborn as a hungry ghost. And the horror of this is that these hungry ghosts might be your dead relatives or people you knew who lived bad lives, essentially. So this is karma coming back to bite these people, to cause them to live these horrific lives. And then even below that, even worse than being a hungry ghost, is to be sent to the hell realm, or Naraka. This is the realm where murderers, thieves, other criminals, really bad people go to, and there are many degrees of suffering that you see here. It's like 26 or something like that. I don't remember the exact number. So there are multiple realms and sub-realms. Here in this graphic, it's interesting. You can see there are cold realms of hell, this icy set of realms to the right, and hot realms of hell to the left, burning and freezing to death over and over and over again. So you don't want to be a bad person. You don't want to end up in these hell realms. You don't want to end up as a hungry ghost. And you don't want to end up as an animal, if you can help it. The animal is definitely the least bad of these. And if you're a good person, hopefully you end up coming back as a human or as a god, or possibly as a demigod, although being a demigod means you're kind of on the bad side of good, I guess. It's a very complicated system. But these are the godly realms, the gati of samsara. Now, a concept that originates probably at least a couple hundred years before Buddhism, but which is then central to Buddhism, is the idea of nirvana. which you may have heard of. The band from when I was a kid is very famous, but nirvana is the escape from this wheel of life. So your ultimate goal is actually not to be dead or alive, but to transcend the wheel of life itself, to escape this realm. And so Buddhas, and there actually can be many of them in most forms of Buddhist belief, are those that escape this set of 6 states and move on to a transcendent state that is even above these gods, these devas, and outside of them. Anyway, that's the rough belief system that we have coming into place, especially by around 500 or 600 BC, which is around when Buddhism is getting going, but which forms over at least 1,000 years, if not longer. As we saw with the Indus River Valley civilization, there were proto-Hindi belief systems already in place several thousand years before this. So maybe up to 2500 BC to 500 or 600 BCE, this religion is still forming, and it will change and evolve over time, especially later on as it shifts and Buddhism leaves India and Hinduism becomes the dominant Indian religion, or remains the dominant Indian religion, and Buddhism is essentially cast out and removed and instead becomes popular in places like Tibet, China, Southeast Asia, Korea, and Japan. And Buddhism kind of morphs and shifts across all of these areas. But getting back into the Indian subcontinent from 1500 to 600 BCE, in the book we read about a second urbanization, and this is really this shift from the Indus to the Ganges. As a part of this formation of Ganges civilization, we see a lot of states, city-states or kind of broader statelets called Mahajanapadas, which is these great realms. And we have some of them labeled here. There are 16 great realms in 1600 BCE, and these are realms that are at war with each other or at rivalry and competition at various times in their history. And as we will see with China, a lot of these religious figures who we see coming out and promoting different schools of Hinduism, and Buddhism is one of them, they are advisors to the leaders of these realms. So one reason that we see a fragmentation in multiple forms of Hinduism is these different realms. We see the exact same thing happen in China with early Chinese philosophy, people like Confucius, Lao Tzu, Mozi, etc. We'll see lots more in a few days. I believe the next lecture will cover this. These fragmented sets of states lead to these fragmented sets of philosophies, both religious and kind of moral or political. We do also see a great degree of rising militarism after the Indus River Valley civilization collapses. Once again, we don't know why it collapsed, but once we see the collapse of the IRV, which, as we watched in that video last week, was apparently a relatively peaceful civilization, that changes as we go to the Ganges. So all these states are warring with each other, at least some of the time. So like with the Hittites who we saw, chariots and horses are a major feature of Vedic and later Ganges culture, and also elephants. So probably all of you have seen or heard of war elephants at least once or twice in your life. Perhaps if you've learned about Alexander the Great, who famously fought against war elephants and was quite surprised to be fighting against them. And we'll learn about him probably a little bit later. But the presence of these elephants is evidence of a lot of the necessary support systems for a big military. So like we saw in Mesopotamia, in the cradle of civilization and the Fertile Crescent, in order to support a large-scale society, you really do start to see significant shifts in social stratification, specialization. Obviously, a lot of these military people, if you're taming and riding elephants, that is certainly a full-time job. This is what you do professionally. And to control and tame, and I don't think they were breeding them, but to tame these elephants, bring them under your control, and essentially domesticate them is something that requires a lot of effort, a lot of resources in terms of where do you keep the elephant, what do you feed the elephant, etc. And they had all of these things. And so the presence of these large militaries says a lot of things about society. Its organizational structure would have to be quite strong, and its resources would be fairly abundant to be able to support these large militaries made of both horse-drawn chariots, horse riders, archers, elephant riders, etc. And here we have a stupa. You can look at this link if you would like, but we have 5th century BCE battle happening here with elephants attacking a walled city at Mala, which I believe is one of the places we see here. Yeah, here's Mala right in the middle. And as the textbook tells you, and this is taken directly from the textbook, page 68, part of the organization that goes into allowing a society like this to exist, or facilitating a society with like big military, big cities, lots of extra resources, is in India the caste system. The caste system is technically outlawed today. I don't remember exactly when it was outlawed, but it was, within a lifetime. Not long ago, the caste system was not outlawed. But this caste system is formed in this Ganges River civilization. So probably between 3,000 and 3,500 years ago, the caste system begins to form, and it's solidified by about 2,500 years ago. And these divisions are quite clear. And we see multiple levels of society. The textbook tells you all about them, and I'm not going to read through it directly, but at the top we have things like priests and kings, warriors just below those. We have merchants after that, and then peasants, servants, and laborers. And then over time, another division even below below the Shudra, the laborers and peasants, are the kind of unspeakable caste, which is even below them, which are, generally speaking, people who deal with death in some way, often like leather workers, butchers, etc. And this is the case in both Buddhism and Hinduism. These people are seen as fundamentally unclean and are below even the Shudra in the social order. This has had major impacts in modern India, in that, and in places like Japan and Korea and China, although not in China anymore after the Maoist revolution, in that those people would share this kind of outcast image or this outcast reputation even after they'd stopped doing those jobs. So you'd be a hereditary outcast, and you might have trouble getting into something like modern politics if your ancestors had been butchers or leather workers or had dealt with burials of people or anything else like that. And so this caste system lasts and still lasts today for many thousands of years, probably 3,000 years or more. And it's an important part of why this culture became so stratified over time. Looking at the textbook here on page 72, I want to just note that whenever you see in the textbook that it says putting it all together, it's a good idea to read that very closely and maybe read it a couple of times. Because when the textbook says putting it all together like that, it's going to summarize a large chunk of the textbook, usually a whole chapter perhaps, is being summarized. And so this section is perhaps one of the most important for you to look at. Okay, so I don't want to spend too long on India because we already spent a day on it, and I want to get into ancient China here for at least 15, 20, 30 minutes before wrapping up this lecture. And so this was technically a separate lecture, but we're going to talk about the Yellow River Valley and the early Chinese concept of empire, one of the first, possibly the first concept of an empire on Earth. although we don't really know that for sure. Some of these places in Mesopotamia may have had concepts of empire as well. We'll be talking about the textbook, chapter 4, page 75 to 81 and 90 to 96, and also some of the gaps in that. And what I was going to have you do in class, but I'll do a little bit here for you, is we're going to look at some oracle bone inscriptions. And normally, as we continue, I'll probably have you look at some of these primary sources, but because we're kind of in the middle of the break here, I'm not going to have you do this on your own. But we'll look at some oracle bone stuff here as we continue. On the right here, we have a reconstruction of what a Shang Dynasty palace might have looked like. You can see it has a thatched roof, earth and maybe some plaster walls, and maybe some wood substructure there, and a lot of rammed earth. This is really tightly packed earth. And you see here a rough reconstruction of the site of one of these palace locations. Fairly large buildings, but not as large as many palaces of later dynasties. To give you some help with dynasties in general in China, and no, you don't have to memorize this, obviously, I thought putting up a list of the dynasties, some of which overlap each other, meaning there were multiple dynasties competing for control of quote-unquote China, what was China at that time, existed at the same time. China shifts in its size and shape quite a bit throughout its history, pretty much continuously. So the places you would call China or part of China shift a lot. You can see this on the left side of the screen here with the Shang Dynasty, which was much smaller than the Zhou Dynasty that follows it. And there are other times, for example, when a dynasty might be split in half, like the Song Dynasty. It's split in half between the northern Song and the southern Song. You can see that here, from 960 to 1279. We'll get to that much later, a few more weeks from now. So China is a story of expansion and contraction. In North China, we have the Yellow River, which is a drier, colder area with kind of continental weather, meaning the weather comes from the continent. It comes in from Russia and Europe, etc. And it is, for agriculture, better for things like wheat, buckwheat, barley, etc. Dry weather, dry field crops. Central China and southern China are both wetter and warmer, and it gets wetter and warmer the further south you go. So central China around the Yangtze River is more suited to rice agriculture, wet paddy, rice and millet. And so the things that are grown in different parts of China are different. China is a huge chunk of land, depending on the time. And so the Yellow River is wheat and barley, Yangtze River is rice and millet, and especially south of that and north of that, this will be the case. And then we also have the Pearl River further south down here, which is mostly subject to monsoon and oceanic weather patterns, but it's not really part of China yet in today's lecture. The Shah are technically, if you look here, the Shah on the top left, technically the first Chinese dynasty, although it's a semi-mythical dynasty. So the Shah dynasty may or may not have existed in terms of being a dynasty, being an empire. There were people that existed during the time that the Shah dynasty supposedly existed, but the kind of historicity, the reality of their existence is probably quite a bit embellished by later scholars. And the most significant of these is someone called Sima Qian from 145 to 90 BCE. This person is possibly one of the first historians, probably the first Chinese historian, but possibly one of the first historians in human history in the modern sense of what a historian is. And so Sima Qian and his records, called in English the Records of the Grand Historian, include writings about times before the Shang dynasty. And that's the Shang dynasty is the first historical dynasty where we know for sure there is an empire, there is a sense of statehood, there is a sense that there is a dynasty in place made of real, confirmable emperors and kings, etc. And it is mostly male-led, as is most of Chinese history. It's a highly patriarchal society, as we'll learn. But the Shah dynasty is less verifiable. The Shah runs from roughly 2070 to 1600 BCE, once again, if it existed. And although we can see that there was a society, likely with cities and likely with kings, that's indisputable. Whether or not there was this continuous, almost 500-year dynasty of the same people running a large chunk of what would become China is not really verifiable. So a lot of the details of that society are essentially unknown. And most of what we learn about the Shah is from the Shang and later, and it seems like the Shah dynasty may have in large part been invented by the Shang as a foil, meaning as a group of people to say, oh, aren't we so much better than the Shah were? To kind of legitimize this new Shang dynasty, you say the Shah, especially towards the end of their rule, became quite corrupt and quite evil. And isn't it so great that we, the new rulers of the Shang dynasty, have taken over for them in this state of China? They weren't calling it China yet, but this state of Shang inherited from Shah. It's also useful to say that there had always been an empire. If you're trying to create an empire, as the Shang probably were, to say that, okay, there was an empire before and we're taking it over, not we're inventing this thing. It gives you some legitimacy to do that. So the story of the Shang overthrow of the Shah, which we see in Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian, as I write here, it's very politically convenient, and it may not be a true story. But the Shang dynasty is a true story. The things we know about the Shang are true stories. One of the first things that we can look at, and I'll open this up and we'll look at it together a little bit here, is the tomb of Fu Hao, which is a female pyromancer. What a cool word, pyromancer. Someone who works with the magic of fire. She is what would later become known as an oracle, who works with something called oracle bones, and we'll be learning about that today. She's the wife of Wu Ding, an emperor of the Shang dynasty. The discovery of her tomb in 1975 was a real kind of treasure trove for archaeologists who found all of these objects. I won't read it all to you, but a lot of bronze objects, weapons, knives, mirrors, bells, jade objects, bone objects, some pottery, not as much pottery, and then a bunch of shells, a bunch of pieces, mostly of ox bone, that were found in a cache. And a lot of these caches have been found throughout the area of the former Shang dynasty, which you can see here around the Yellow River. And these bones had unique kind of magical and mystical uses. But let's look at Fu Hao's tomb just for a minute. This website's a really good one. I know it looks like a very old website. It probably is a very old website, but it has a lot of great little links in it. And you can look at some of the jade objects and bronze objects here. So just to look at a couple of them, we see lots of bronze vessels, and these were ritual vessels, often buried with people from the Shang dynasty onward. And so here we have one, a wine vessel. I'm not sure what creature this is, they ask. I'm not actually sure what that creature is. Possibly a dog or a lion, I'm not quite sure. And here's a bronze axe, a container, a drinking vessel. And these bronze vessels are very common. If you want to learn about these bronze vessels, a bronze vessel would be a good object for your object paper. You can just Google Chinese bronze vessels and you will get so many results, I promise. Also lots of jade, a seated human figure carved from jade. A phoenix. Phoenixes are very common in old Chinese motifs, as in new Chinese motifs. A tiger, an elephant, and various other things, dragons, etc. Here's a hawk. Here's a stone ox. And you can look at this set of objects a little bit more closely on your own if you want. But moving right along here, this tomb find was one of many finds of oracle bones. And here's one cache on the bottom right here. Mostly, in this case, a mix of ox shells, it looks like, and perhaps a few turtle shells or tortoise shells are very common. And I have a lot of links here for you, a couple of videos you can look at here on the top. Maybe I'll let one run in the background here for a minute while I talk about this. But oracle bones seems to be having a problem loading, but here we go. Oracle bones are essentially used to guess things about the future. The bones would be placed in a fire, or a fire placed under them with writing put on them, and where they cracked, what areas of the bone cracked, would be read, kind of like a palm reader reads your palm, to determine, using these lines in the cracks of fire, to decide which elements of a prophecy might be true. So a really simple one would be like, is it going to rain next month for the new crop that we've planted? And you'd have yes or no. And if it cracked towards yes, it would be a yes. If it cracked towards no, it would be a no. You could use this to kind of learn about the future, learn about the truth of the world you're living in. And so we have a lot of examples of these. I'm going to open this top link. I already have it open here. I'm going to look at a few of these. And I encourage you, this is something I was going to do in classes, have you read this, but because we're in this first week, and you're technically on break as I'm recording this, I'm going to read a couple of these to you, and you're going to maybe get a sense of what these oracle bones would be used for. So the first one is that Father Yi, the 20th Shang King, Xiao Yi, the father of Wu Ding, is harming the king. So this person divines that this former king, it looks like, is harming the new king, is taking some evil actions against him. And then another person found that grandfather Ding is harming the king. But then someone else found that it is not grandfather Ding who is harming the king. So we have some contrary prophecies here in 9A and B. And then in 10, we see there is a sick tooth. It is not Father Yi who's harming him. So it is a sick tooth. There is a sick tooth may mean that, so there's something rotten in your bureaucracy or in your state here. I'll zoom in on this just a little bit. Sorry about that. Let me see, let's jump to number 19. If we build a settlement, D will not obstruct but approve. So this is probably a deity, D, or a kind of a supernatural force in existence. I'm not sure exactly what D is referencing here, but that the forces that be will approve if we build a settlement here. Learning where to put your town, put your new place to live, is one thing you could use these bones for. A lot of the time, these would be ox bones, scapula shoulder bones from oxes, because they're these big, broad bones that you could write on, and they would crack very well. Turtle shells also, or tortoise shells, as we saw, another kind of broader bone that you can write on easily and that will crack in interesting ways. And then you can see another one for the harvest. And it is D who is harming or not harming the harvest. So you're learning about the problem. So perhaps D is another state that they're dealing with, or some person that they're dealing with. I'm not exactly sure. Let's move back to the slides here. So I have a few of these sets of readings for oracle bones. The main point is to understand that this pyromancy, often performed by female oracles, was something that was used for both large and small matters. Things as simple as, is it going to rain? Where should we build our settlement, etc., up to things like, who should be the ruler of our lands? So it gives legitimacy to rulers in some cases, or takes legitimacy away. We're going to get to that here in a minute. So the Shang dynasty represents in part the birth of empire. As I said earlier, we see both trade routes, core territories, and then extended territories outside of that core. So the core territory in this case is this green, kind of oblong green empire. And then outside of that, we have other areas that are under that empire's control or influence in some way. And the book calls these client states. Client states indicates a sense of fealty between the client state and the center. And so this is kind of like imperialistic thinking. This is probably one of the world's first empires forming. And China, from this point on, becomes an empire, a place that has power and influence that extends beyond its borders, often to the extent that other places call themselves sub-states or kind of, I guess client states is a good way to put it, but members of this umbrella, living under this umbrella of Chinese authority and influence. A notable place on this map, something like Korea. Korea has its own defined separate culture throughout history that is different in important ways from China, but for much of Korean history, it falls under this Chinese umbrella. Not always, but for a lot of its history, Korea is not technically part of China, but it is deeply influenced by China, and it considers itself to be one of the parts of the Chinese empire, meaning it is in communication with, sends emissaries to, and in some ways considers itself to be below or loyal to China. Japan, notably, is not this way. It kind of retains independence because it's an island nation, and this is one of the reasons, even in ancient China, they were kind of saying bad things about Japan, calling it the land of the evil dwarves and things like that, which maybe we'll get to a little bit later. And we also see, with the fall of the Shang, at the end of the Shang dynasty, and I'll go back here, at the end of the Shang dynasty, around 1027 BCE, and the start of the Zhou dynasty, we see something quintessentially Chinese, quintessential to Chinese empire, form, this idea of the mandate of heaven. This is a very important idea to understanding both ancient and pre-modern and early modern China, really, because this is something that exists until the Maoist revolution, so well into the modern period, is this idea of the mandate of heaven. It shows up on page 85 of our textbook, and it is the beginning of what is known as the dynastic cycle in China. So what is the mandate of heaven? Essentially, the mandate of heaven is the argument that there are supernatural forces, call them gods, call them entities, call them deities, or just call it heaven as in a larger, broader world that exists above us, where power comes from for our rulers. So our rulers are connected, if they're ancient Chinese or pre-modern Chinese emperors, they're connected to this heavenly power. And the Chinese character for heaven also appears in the Chinese character for ruler. And in Japanese, ten no, ten is heaven. I don't know exactly how you say it in Chinese. But this mandate of heaven can be lost. So you may be born without the mandate of heaven. You may get it later in life, meaning that you should be the ruler of China. And then later on, maybe 2-3 generations down the line, you could lose it. Your grandson might lose the mandate of heaven and someone else would take over. So when the Shang fell, they had several rulers in a row who were considered to be kind of despotic, kind of evil, not really looking out for the people below them. And so the Zhou rose up to overthrow the Shang with this justification of this mandate of heaven. So the initial argument for this mandate of heaven comes from the Zhou, saying the Shang have lost the mandate of heaven. They are no longer supported by the gods, and the Zhou have taken it from them and will do a better job of leading China. And so here we have the cycle kind of described in circular form. You can look at this on your own. But some of the many reasons why one might lose the mandate of heaven are actually out of human control. And this is part of why we see so many dynasties coming in and out of Chinese history. Why that first slide in this series has so many of those dynasties, some of them very short-lived, others very long. Because things like floods, diseases, famines, invasions from foreign states, etc., could be reasons that you would lose the mandate of heaven. You might claim the mandate of heaven. You might say, I, as the Emperor of China, have the mandate of heaven in times when things are very good. If there is something auspicious that happens, perhaps a comet or meteor is visible in the sky, you might say, this is the sign that I have the mandate of heaven. Or an eclipse or something like that could be a good or bad sign, etc. Perhaps a few years of very good weather, good crops, etc. These could be reasons to claim the mandate of heaven. Generally speaking, when you lose the mandate of heaven, there's a big rebellion and they kill you or kill members of your dynasty or your empire. And so this is a cycle that does involve revolutionary violence. And it is therefore justifiable if the ruler of China is doing a bad job to rise up and kill them. This is part of this cycle, and the mandate of heaven therefore is really a two-sided coin, because you really want to have it. When you have the mandate of heaven, it's a very good thing. But once things are going poorly, people then have a very clear way to get rid of you, to say you've lost the mandate of heaven, and now is a justified time for us to rise up and get rid of you. So that's really what I wanted to cover today with ancient China. The book will tell you a lot more than I've told you here in this lecture, and you should still be reading the book. For next time, we're going to get going into early America and Oceania. That will be a fairly short lecture talking about that, and then we'll have a discussion led by you, the students, about comparisons between early societies. So both between perhaps Mesopotamia, India, China, and also the Americas will make for a good discussion. And I want to hear from all of you. And I'll give you kind of a broad lecture about the early Americas, covering some of the things I haven't had you read in the textbook. So because we're doing catch-up, we have two readings listed here. One would be the one that you would have done at the end of last Thursday. So chapter 5, 97 to 119. And the other part for the next week, which is the week we're actually restarting here, chapter 6, page 122 to 140. And the examine sections of this will usually be something I will do either on the discussion board or in these lectures. So today we examined the oracle bones. All right. Make sure by the 22nd you turn in your short response number 1, which is just that quiz number 1 that I handed out back when we were in person. So you're probably basically done with that by now anyway. And then also by the 22nd, by that Sunday night, make sure you have put in your responses to the discussion questions. Those discussion questions hopefully will be up by the 19th. I would like everyone to put up their discussion questions as quickly as possible. I know we're in a bit of a time crunch here in the first week, so we'll be a little bit flexible, and then we'll get into a better schedule here as we continue. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to post on Blackboard in our discussion here about early societies, and best of luck with all your classes. I'll see you next time.